primary election, co-hosted by The Appeal and Now This. I'm Jay Willis, your host for today, senior contributor at The Appeal. And we have with us four candidates in this race who have reported fundraising amounts, the four candidates who have reported fundraising amounts have been invited to participate, rather. And today I'm pleased to welcome Joy Chowdhury, a taxi driver, community organizer, former city council community liaison, judicial delegate, and a member of the U.S. National Guard. I'm also pleased to welcome the incumbent, Michael Den Dekker, who was elected to the State Assembly in 2008. Before entering State Assembly, he held a number of civic leadership positions, including Queens Community Board number 3. And lastly, Jessica Gonzalez Rojas, former executive director for the National Latina Institute for Reproductive Health, an expert on healthcare reform, gender, and racial justice. Not here today, but also running is Nuala O'Doherty Naranjo, a former Manhattan prosecutor who has dedicated herself to public service, particularly through her years of service on Community Education Council for District 30. And also not with us today is Angel Cruz. So a little bit about this district. It is located, as you might have guessed, in Queens. It includes the neighborhoods of Jackson Heights, Woodside, Elmhurst, and Corona. It is one of the most diverse areas in the country, and its neighborhoods have also been among those most impacted by the coronavirus pandemic in New York City. So again, candidates, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Quick overview of how this format will work. I'll give you at first 2 minutes for an opening statement. We'll then move to a brief question and answer period. You'll each have 90 seconds to respond, and I will follow up as necessary. So with that, I'll kick it to Joy for an opening statement. Go ahead.
I am a working class immigrant running to bring more working class representation at the Albany. I am a taxi driver. If you guys don't know yet, there are 9 taxi drivers have committed suicide because they were struggling to make a living. I am the only member of my family who lives in this country who's about to finish his graduation. I am also looking for everyone's solidarity to see how we can make the Albany more diverse. I'm also, this is the 3rd time I'm running for election. I ran for student government before. So every time I run for something, there's always somebody who says, I have language barrier, I have accent. I don't get upset because I do have language barrier and accent. And I represent many people who have the same struggle. I'm running from a district that's majority immigrant, foreign born, over 60%. Almost 18% of the teenagers are living under the poverty. Graduation rate is very low. So I think I am close to the pain of most people in the district. And I feel the pain of all immigrants as a first generation of immigrant. And that's why I am running. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael.
Thank you very much, Jay, for having me today. My name is Mike Den Dekker. I am living in Jackson Heights. I've lived here my entire life. I'm born in the house that my grandfather bought in 1957. And I've been a member of the Assembly now for 12 years. I'm a retired sanitation worker and a 9/11 responder. The reason why I got into this position to begin off with is because somebody up in Albany signed a piece of paper one day that took away a lot of jobs from me and my family. Prior to being with the Department of Sanitation, I was a milk truck driver in Local 584. And another Governor Cuomo by the name of Mario Cuomo signed a law that allowed New Jersey milk to come to New York City. And when they did, the entire New York City milk industry went out of business. We all lost our jobs because non-union milk came in, and the milk that came in from New Jersey had 3 extra days of shelf life, and we could not compete with it. And my brother and all of us lost our jobs. I happened to be lucky. I had taken the test to become a sanitation worker, and I got a job in the sanitation department. I was asked to run for the New York State Assembly by the local Democratic Party after I had tried to run for the city council in 2001, but the party was not interested in having me run. So I stood with the Department of Sanitation. Since being elected, I've authored approximately 28 or 30 bills, everything from closing the loophole in the police department for what was a local phone call to bill about sealed records and releasing information for sealed records. Also right now, it's graduation time. A lot of people are going to be going to college. I did a bill that requires the college to let you know if your dorm has a fire sprinkler system. Many colleges assign you a dorm room, and then will have multiple dorms on their campuses. Some of them have fire suppression systems and some of them don't. And the only way you'll find out is if they tell you. So there's a lot of other bills that we're going to be talking about, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Thanks very much. Jessica.
Everyone, thank you, Jay, for having me. My name is Jessica Gonzalez Rojas, and I'm running for state assembly because I believe the government has failed us. The government has failed us when we witness more deaths in our community right here in Jackson Heights, East Elmhurst, Corona, and Woodside than anywhere else in the world. The government has failed us when we've witnessed massive police brutality, incompetent prosecutors, and overcrowded prisons. It is time for a change. I am running for state assembly because the incumbent voted for austerity in this moment. He voted to slash funding for Elmhurst Hospital by $10 million while people are dying. He voted to roll back bail reform that would have prevented Black, brown, and poor people from ending up in prisons and jails. In a district that is 88% people of color, 62% immigrant, we don't have time to wait any longer. Representation matters because inequality kills. I have a plan. I plan to raise taxes on the rich. I plan to make sure that Medicaid, Medicare for all becomes a reality here in New York through the New York Health Act. And I plan to address systemic inequities against Black, brown, and immigrant communities that are faced across the entire state. I'm an advocate with a proven track record of standing up and speaking out against injustices. And it is high time that we have someone that reflects both the values and the diversity of the community representing us. So we don't have any more time to wait. I'm ready to roll up my sleeves, and I hope to earn your vote.
Thank you, candidates. So first, I'd like to talk about the ongoing crisis of police violence in America and the protests that we're seeing across the country in the wake of the deaths of Ahmaud Arbery, Brianna Taylor, and George Floyd. This moment is happening when we're seeing cities and states slash their budgets in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. But at the same time, you're seeing police budgets remain essentially unchanged, or in some cities, they're even growing, even as cities are cutting housing, education, healthcare, and other social services. So I'll ask you, Michael, first, what is your position on the realignment of public safety budgets, on defunding the police by shifting resources away from what we might call traditional law enforcement and focusing instead on public health-backed and community-backed interventions?
So that's a very good question. The New York State Assembly does not fund the local police department. We fund the city of New York, and the New York City Council allocates that money according to their priorities. So I would hope that my colleagues in the New York City Council, as they have been saying, are planning in this year's budget starting July 1st to change the priority of their budget. In the Assembly, there are many things that we in the majority have been fighting for some time. One, for instance, was the summer youth program, which seems to be the first thing that the mayor announced that he was going to cut this year. And that's, again, something that we have no control over, but we were very, very upset about. So as our role in the Assembly is limited in as far as local police department. As far as the statewide police department, which is the New York State Police, there is going to be a funding issue regardless of the budgetary crisis that we're in. And I believe that we will be looking to move money around into more of the priorities aligned with the Assembly majority. Keeping in mind, though, that there's 68 members of the New York City delegation that make up the Assembly, and there's a total of 213 legislators, and of course, then the governor, we have to wait and see what we can actually get passed. And that always has been an issue. There are a lot of good bills that we have passed in the Assembly that we can't get passed in the Senate, and if we do, we have a governor that sometimes vetoes them.
Thank you. Jessica, same question.
I absolutely support the defunding of the NYPD. Where the state legislature has a lot of power is to actually look at the money that has gone to the MTA police. In this moment, the incumbent voted to pass a bill that funds the MTA police by $249 million. I believe that $249 million can be used to improve service, accessibility, and reliability in this moment. So we have to stand up and make sure that we're making true investments in decarceration, and taking away money from the police and instead putting it into housing, healthcare, and education. This is a moment, and it's an opportunity to really put our money where our mouth is and ensure that we're addressing not just police accountability bills, but actually looking at the criminal justice system by passing plans such as removing the HALT Solidarity Act, releasing our elders from prison, and addressing fair and timely parole.
Thanks. I'll ask Joy the same question, but quickly, Michael, if you'd like 30 seconds to respond to that, go ahead.
Just a lot of things that Ms. Gonzalez Rojas has said are all bills that I co-sponsor. So she, has constantly talked about HALT Solidarity and the co-sponsor of the bill. I would love to see that bill pass. I think we're aligned, believe it or not, on almost every issue. I haven't found one that we haven't. I would correct one thing that she keeps on saying in this last budget about the Medicaid funding that cost Elmhurst General Hospital supposedly $10 million. That's totally inaccurate. What she's talking about was a budgetary piece that we did for the Health and Hospitals Corporation that actually netted them more money than the money they were getting, because by not having the state funding available, it opened them up to federal funding, which got them a higher reimbursement rate. Therefore,
Thanks,
they actually netted more money.
I'm really sorry. I'd like to keep focused on the public safety issue right now. We're going to come back to healthcare a little bit later, but I just did want to give you that chance there. Joy, I'll return to you. What's your position on defunding police, shifting those resources away?
I do not support any funding to NYPD while our communities are struggling during the pandemic. And from day one, I support a criminal justice reform, including no new jail, including police accountability, including mental health program, including prosecuting corrupted landlords. So yes, I do not support funding NYPD while we are struggling with so many things during the pandemic.
Thank you. So moving from the general concept of public safety and defunding police to specific reforms. So you just had the New York legislature pass reforms that included criminalizing the use of chokeholds by law enforcement officers on suspects, imposing additional disclosure requirements related to racial disparities in policing, and repealing Section 50A of the state civil rights law, which has long been used to shield police misconduct complaints from public disclosure. So first, I want to ask the challengers, if you had been an assembly member, would you have supported these measures? And also, what other measures would you support in order to address these concerns related to law enforcement in New York? And I'll ask Jessica first.
Yes, absolutely. I've been calling for these measures for months prior to our incumbent signing on to those bills. I would also want to advance legislation that is in 45 other states where we can declassify police officers that have been charged with misconduct. It is right now a police officer can leave a police department due to misconduct, but actually move on to a different police department and continue to get hired. So we have to address that loophole right now as well.
Thank you. Joy, same question.
I definitely support the current measures. And I also, similar to what Jessica said, I mentioned in the previous one of the debate that I will also support a legislation that will investigate on NYPD officers who not only for current action, but the history of how they conducted their business with our people of color in the past.
Thank you. Michael, as Jessica alluded to earlier, you supported community demands for policing reform, and I believe you actually announced that you would be donating police association campaign contributions to local nonprofits, and you also supported the repeal of 50A. So setting aside that legislation for a moment, are there other measures you advocate that would reform policing in New York?
Well, I think one of the things that we need to do is to create an independent outside body or agency so that if a police officer that is on the job would like to report another police officer that is either corrupt or racist or is committing some other type of offense, that they would be able to report them anonymously, and it could be investigated from an independent source. The Internal Affairs Division, I believe, is a very poor way of having police. So it's not a good way.
Thanks. I want to move on now to another issue that's received a lot of national attention lately, that of no-knock warrants. And you're seeing that come up in conjunction with the police killing of Brianna Taylor in Louisville, Kentucky. She was in her apartment when police served a no-knock warrant and shot her at least 8 times, killing her. Police found nothing illegal in her home, and in fact, the person who they were searching for was already in custody elsewhere. And as you know, New York has its own history of no-knock raid tragedies. In 2010, Nassau County Police executed a no-knock raid on the wrong address in Hempstead and shot and killed 22-year-old Ayanna Davis. Shot 22-year-old Ayanna Davis. Luckily, she survived, but a New York Times investigation found that around 100 people, that's both civilians and law enforcement, died in no-knock and quick-knock raids in the US between 2010 and 2016. Many more were seriously injured. Polling indicates that a majority of voters agree with implementing policies to strictly regulate or even eliminate altogether the use of no-knock raids. So Michael, I'll ask you first, do you believe New York State should adopt a formal ban on no-knock raids?
Yes, I do. Unless there's an absolute super extreme case of somebody making a bomb or some other device and it was imminent danger to the community, that might be the only exception. But otherwise than that, I believe that the no-knock warrants should be completely banned.
Thank you. Joy, same question.
Fix the problem of knocking, like no knock policy. I will support that, and I will continue to see if we can come up with more concrete legislation that will have more information about how we can figure out that we as an NYPD and other criminal justice criminal justice agencies that also apply the same policy.
Thank you. Same question to you, Jessica.
Yeah, absolutely. We need to ban no-knock policies. See, criminal justice is a racial justice issue. And as all the stories that you shared before have been targeted against people of color. So we really need to look at the system as a systemic issue, as a systemic racial justice issue, and address all the policies that have been used again to murder our communities.
So I want to make sure I understand. You would support a total a ban on no-knock raids? Michael, you mentioned you would support them in exigent circumstances. Have you thought at all about how you would craft legislation like that? How do you draw legislation on sort of such a fine problem that necessarily involves the discretion of police officers?
Well, I wouldn't leave it to the discretion of the police officers. I would leave it to the discretion of the judge that's going to issue the warrant.
So if a judge were to sign off on a no-knock warrant, that would not fall within the scope of the type of a ban or prohibition or restriction that you're envisioning?
Well, no, what I'm envisioning is a ban on no-knock warrants with an extreme exception. So you'd have to go to a judge and explain to a judge what this extreme exemption was. So, for example, we have reason to believe that the person in there is currently building a nuclear device, some sort of smart bomb or something in there in this apartment, and we don't want to knock. We want to just be able to go immediately. And if they had enough evidence that would convince a judge of this one particular incident, that they might allow it. But otherwise than that, it should not be allowed. It would have to be imminent danger.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I understand. So
I'm not an attorney, so I'd have to leave it to the programming council and the legal people and the judiciary committee and codes to come up with a bill that would be legal. I mean, I don't know if how that could work, but that's something that I would envision.
I understand. So it wouldn't be a full ban, but it would allow them only in an extremely limited set of circumstances, it sounds like, based on the judge's discretion.
That's something that I would be fine with. If somebody came out with a bill that was just a complete ban, though, I would vote for that too.
You would support a full ban?
I would. If there was a bill out there to do that and it made it to the floor, I would vote for it.
Thank you. I also would like to ask about a different aspect of reimagining public safety. As you all know, in the way American law enforcement is set up, police respond to a lot of things that don't require an armed police response. They serve as first responders to people experiencing mental health crises, substance use crises, and the like. But across the country, we've seen cities like Portland, Oregon, and Austin, Texas, shift some of these responsibilities from law enforcement to dedicated separate teams of healthcare professionals and social workers whose expertise allows them to more directly address the problem. We've also seen polling showing that most people, and that's a bipartisan phenomenon, most Democrats and Republicans, support the creation of non-law enforcement agencies to handle these types of situations. So I'll ask Joy first. As a member of the State Assembly, would you support the creation of agencies like these?
Yes, I will definitely support.
That was easy enough. Jessica, same question.
Yeah, I think this is the idea behind defunding the NYPD and other police forces, right? It's about reimagining what those money and resources could be used for. It is about investing, taking money away from the militarization of our communities and putting them into social services, using them for guidance counselors and social workers and health professionals and mental health professionals to really provide the support that our communities need. We need to stop addressing every problem with a police, prosecutor, prison pipeline. We need to really shift those funds and those resources to really invest in the rehabilitation and restorative justice of our communities. And I completely agree that we have to start first with looking at social services and addressing the problem with real solutions and not criminalization of our communities.
Thank you. Michael, what's your response to that?
I also totally agree. We have police officers that are only equipped with either a device to electrocute you or a device that will shoot a piece of lead at you. They should not be responding to many of the calls. It should not be in their purview. It should be done by more social services, especially for mental health issues and substance abuse issues. And I would totally agree with that suggestion.
So acknowledging, as you said earlier, that the state government, the state legislature has limited power in some of these more local decisions, I'd like to ask you about how you envision funding these, whether you view them as mutually exclusive or not. So Joy, for example, would you support defunding police and moving those resources to one of these agencies, or is it in your view one where you would prefer to fund?
I will absolutely support. I would absolutely support defunding NYPD and moving those resources and money to agencies that will help our communities in a many different ways.
Jessica, how do you view the distinction between those?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when we look at moving money, that's the responsibility of the state legislature, right? To create and pass a budget that speaks to the morality of what we believe. And we need to move money away from police institutions and criminalization and instead make those investments. So I absolutely would move that money. Obviously, the NYPD falls within the city, but things like the MTA police we should not be using funds that should go towards improving transportation to instead policing poor people who are often jumping turnstiles or selling churros on the train. So there's lots of ways we can look at how systems have been criminalized and really address and move the funding and resources to improve those systems at its cause.
Yeah, Michael, how do you view this question as an appropriations issue, especially given that so many budgets are being stretched right now? This isn't a time when a lot of governments have, tens, hundreds of millions of dollars lying around that they can just create a separate agency. Well,
there's a lot of ways that we can raise more revenue, and if we're going to have that conversation in a second, but I agree with what we're saying. So we need to put more money into the social services aspect of this, And you're taking the resources or some of those resources from traditional law enforcement, which is fine because they're not going to need to do that job anymore. So because they don't need to do that job anymore, they don't need as much money. It's just common sense. So to move money from one portion, from the law enforcement portion to the social services portion to serve the same job would be a very appropriate way to do it. Again, from the state perspective, we don't only have control over the Port Authority Police, the MTA Police, and the state police. However, we could do legislation that would require local government to provide those services. And then if we did something like that, then the local government would be on the mat, so to speak, that they would have to do their budget appropriately to make sure that they fulfilled the state requirement of having those services available.
Thanks. I want to move now to the other crisis that this country and New York are grappling with, the coronavirus crisis. So a December 2019 report found that 20% of Corona and Greater Elmhurst residents live below the federal poverty level, compared to 13.2% of residents across Queens. Many residents have had to face and will continue to face the prospect of eviction in the coming weeks and months. So my question, Jessica, I'll start with you, is what strategies, what policies would you support to help those who are on the verge of homelessness during this pandemic?
Absolutely. I think coronavirus just shined a light on the systemic inequities that we've seen for decades. This district is reflective of 66% of renters. These renters since March 1st have been figuring out how to pay their rent in this moment. And we need bold solutions to address it. We need to cancel rent, and we need to really resolve some of the deeper issues that many of the housing advocates have been fighting for. We need to remove tax breaks and tax incentives from luxury developers who are not building affordable housing, because affordable housing is a huge problem in New York City and in our communities. We need to get rid of the MCIs, which are the major capital improvement, which are loopholes that allow for landlords to upcharge rent. And we really need to look at good cause eviction, that anyone who is being evicted is given a good cause. It's just a matter of dignity and justice, and we need to address those solutions. In this moment, though, canceling rent is the absolute priority. The bill that the Assembly passed is not enough. Someone equated it to, if you want to go for a run, you break your foot first and then go for a run. You don't solve the problem with the bill that was passed, right? We need a policy that would prevent our renters who are unable to pay rent from facing future evictions. So I will fight for all those things, getting rid of NCIs, getting rid of the tax loopholes, and working to cancel rent for the relief of our communities.
Thank you. Joy, same question to you.
In the beginning of the COVID-19, I advocated for a petition to cancel rent. And I advocated also for unemployment benefit. Like as you know, I'm a gig worker. I don't have any guaranteed income. So a lot of the gig workers, they're not eligible. They were not eligible at the beginning to receive unemployment benefit. And also, I think, and from day one, I helped a lot of neighbors to deliver groceries. So besides that, we're gonna, as a state assembly member if I get elected, I'm gonna continue the same thing. And I think it's necessary that we prepare ourselves in the future, because we don't know what's gonna happen, if there's gonna be a second wave. So I'm gonna continue to do that and continue to fight for working class people as a gig worker, and everything that prohibits a lot of our undocumented immigrant to access unemployment benefit, because right now a lot of immigrants are not receiving unemployment benefit because of their immigration status, including gig workers.
Thanks, Joy. Michael, same question to you.
So it's a very complicated issue. First of all, on cancel rent, I co-sponsored the bill as soon as it came out. I would love to cancel rent, and I hope we can do it. It's going to take some help from our federal counterparts. If we don't get the approximately $14 billion that we're running short of now, that's going to already present a problem. canceling rent is more than just helping the people that can't pay the rent. There's also going to be the building owner that has expenses that need to be paid. And you also have property taxes and water bills, which are due to local government. So we need to find a way to do it that we can make sure that the tenant stays where they are and has their rent relief in the form of a cancellation, because they can't go back and pay for something that they had no money to pay to begin off with. That's not fair. This didn't happen to any fault of their own. So it's all really going to depend on how much money we have. And if we don't get the money from the federal government, then I think the state is going to have to find new dedicated revenue to be able to find this relief. The bill that we did, I totally agree with, was inadequate. It only was going to help a few people. But in that case, it was better to help somebody rather than nobody. But all of that was kicking the can down the road, waiting for a stimulus bill to come from Washington, which, according to our congressional people that we've talked to, there's something in the works. We'll see if it comes to fruition.
Thank you. So recognizing that there are moving parts here, I want to make sure I understand, let's say you don't get the kind of cooperation from the federal government or from local governments that you would like. Is canceling rent, is passing a policy like that, is that still something you would support? Or is that not something that's possible unless everybody cooperates and works together?
I believe that we all are in agreement, at least in the Assembly majority and a majority of my colleagues in New York City especially, that we have to do something. How we're going to pay for it is what we're waiting to find out. So if the federal government comes through with the funding, that's what should happen. We would all be much easier to be able to move that forward. If that doesn't happen, first of all, you're going to have to find the revenue to fulfill the shortfall that we have now, 14, 16 billion. And then you're going to have to factor in what's it going to cost you to do a cancel rent bill that is fair and equitable to everybody. It's going to be a very difficult project, and we have to wait and see on which way we're going to go forward.
Thanks. As we've often seen, many of those who have lost their jobs during the pandemic worked in industries that might not bounce back quickly, and they may remain unemployed and in many cases uninsured for the foreseeable future. As a member of the State Assembly, what would you do, or what have you done, Michael, to help individuals obtain health insurance and income in order to sort of weather this crisis? And Joy, I'll ask the question to you first.
So the first thing that I've done is...
Sorry, I want to ask Joy first. I'll give you a break. How about that?
Sorry.
No, it's all good.
So your question is, what have I done for the healthcare and can you repeat?
Well, not you personally yet, but as a member of the State Assembly, what are policies or ideas that you would support to make sure that constituents in your district have access to healthcare during this time?
Absolutely. I don't have healthcare because I'm a gig worker, and it's personal to me. And I will make sure I support legislation that will allow healthcare to everybody during the pandemic. So I will also make sure we make all the city and government resources available to everybody in my district, so that can utilize the current resources we have.
Thank you. Michael, same question.
So I am one of the co-sponsors for the Healthcare for All plan for New York State. I believe healthcare is a right. Everybody should have healthcare. Every single person in the United States should have healthcare. It should be done at a federal level. Like usual, the federal government is not stepping up, and state government is trying to find a way to do it. The only thing I have a concern about, and I'm still 100% supportive, is people that are currently retired that have healthcare benefits through their previous employer. You can't take away their healthcare to have a healthcare for all for everybody else, especially if they're no longer New York State residents. So that's a complicated issue that needs to be worked out. But I think if we could get by that one issue, the Healthcare for All plan that's currently drafted could work.
Thank you. Lastly, Jessica, same question.
In this moment, we have to do everything that we can to ensure the dignity and the livelihood of our community. The New York Health Act is one of my top priorities to fight for as an assembly member. I just got the endorsement of Senator Gustavo Rivera, who is the chairman of the Senate Health Committee and the chief sponsor of the New York Health Act. So that would be a top priority and plans that I have. I would also fight to ensure that we have an excluded worker fund to ensure that we're capturing those who are falling through the cracks. As we talked about, the federal government has absolutely failed us. In a community that is 62% immigrant, our immigrant brothers and sisters have not gotten any relief. Those who are mixed status families have not gotten any relief, and it is incumbent upon the state to ensure that our community members can have the relief that they need to survive in this moment. So I have a plan to pass the New York Health Act, to pass the Excluded Worker Fund, and to tax the rich to get there.
Thank you. And I do want to ask a little bit about something that several of you have touched on now. In District 34, more than 50% of residents are Latinx, and it's seen an overwhelming number of COVID-19 cases. Mayor de Blasio described Elmhurst as the epicenter of the pandemic. And one of the problems that we're seeing is the fact that there are many immigrants in the district who do not have legal status, and therefore they are not eligible for the sort of federal relief, the $1,200 stimulus check that Congress passed as part of the CARES Act. But we have seen elsewhere, for example, in Austin, Texas, a few local jurisdictions step up to fill this gap by creating supplemental funds to provide relief to folks who are especially vulnerable. And again, that includes people without legal immigration status. I'm wondering what your position is, and Jessica, I'm sorry, I'll ask you first. What is your position on all New York residents, regardless of immigration status, receiving some kind of relief during this pandemic? And as an assembly member, what would you do to help or encourage local jurisdictions to set up funds like those?
Absolutely. I have been an immigrant justice advocate my entire life. My father's an immigrant from a small country in South America called Paraguay. And it's been, the personal is political. So immigration has been an issue I've been fighting for decades. In our community, I co-founded an organization over 20 years ago called New Immigrant Community Empowerment. I have a plan to invest and fight to ensure that there's funding for an Excluded Workers Act, as I mentioned. This is a fund that would allow for distribution of money for relief for workers who are excluded from the federal package. We also must partner with the city government, and I know the city government has built a fund as well to provide funding for undocumented communities, but it's only $400. That is not enough to barely cover groceries for 2 weeks. So we need to ensure that the city-state partnership, even in the absence of federal money, that the city-state partnership to ensure that every single resident is getting the relief that they need. And I have the relationships and the partnerships both with the community-based organization. I've been endorsed by Make the Road Action right here in our district. And I will fight alongside the immigrant rights activists and the city and state officials to make sure that our communities get what they need to survive in this moment.
Thank you. Michael, same question to you.
Yes, so what you just said is exactly right. With local government, we've asked to step up, and our local government did. Again, that fund is too small and that amount is too small, and more needs to be done. But we did work with local government, and Mayor de Blasio, to his credit, did create that fund, but it's still so inadequate. I also co-sponsor that bill that has to create a fund to help everybody out. The unfortunate problem with that is it's going to take time to get that fund started, to get that money in. Even if we were to implement it tomorrow, none of that funding would come in until April of next year. So it's still going to leave you a gap. So what you'd have to do first is a bill that would allow the state to borrow money to be able to use the money now and have the future tax revenue that you're looking for pay back that loan, so you wouldn't have to wait to get the money in.
I want to make sure I understand for folks. You mentioned that April date. Is that due to budgeting cycles?
Well, no, if you pass a tax right now on the wealthiest people, they're not going to pay their tax till April 15th next year. So you're not going to get them, can't make them pay tomorrow.
Thank you. Joy, same question to you.
So as an immigrant myself, I have seen how devastating is it in our immigrant communities. People were, they were like under a lot of depression because, first of all, there is no language justice, kind of not proper language accessibility we have for immigrant community. Not everybody can read what our federal government instruction and resources that government is sharing with us, first of all. And then a lot of people were left behind because of their immigration status. I have been working day and night to translate a lot of things and provide the research to the immigrant community since the beginning. And I think we have to do everything we can to make sure none of our community members are left behind. And I will do as an immigrant. I think I will be the first immigrant assemblyman, if I'm not wrong, getting elected assemblyman in this district. If I get elected, and it's going to be it's always going to be personal, and I will always fight harder to make it happen.
Thank you so much. Candidates, that's all the questions I have. I do want to give each of you an opportunity to give a brief closing statement, 2 minutes, as I know the election is coming up around the corner. So Jessica, I'll ask you to go first.
Great. As I mentioned, I'm Jessica Gonzalez Rojas. I hope to earn your vote for those who are watching. I am someone who believes that we need to look at the failures of our government and the fact that our communities have been often left behind, and ensure we're electing an advocate who's going to fight tooth and nail for every single member of this community. Remember that 88% of our community are people of color, 62% are immigrants. And we need to ensure that we're fighting to bring resources, jobs, healthcare, education, and housing to our districts. So I will be that advocate. I will fight for every single person in this community, as I've done in the past as a social justice leader. I will do so in the future. So I have a plan to ensure that we have Medicare for all in the state, so that every single person can have access to healthcare despite employment. In this moment, we see employment should not be tied to your healthcare. Healthcare is a human right. We need to address the criminal injustices that we're seeing in this state. And we need to tax the rich to get there. So I hope to earn your vote, and I look forward to folks turning out next Tuesday, June 23rd.
Thank you. Joy, go ahead.
I have only been living in this, in the United States for 10 years. In 10 years, I worked so hard. Most of my American lives, I had 2 jobs and full-time school. I wanted to get a degree, and at the same time, I want to give back to the community. I worked like every level I can, try to keep up as someone who grew up in another country, and try to keep up, Americanize myself, and learn more, grow, and fight for our community, fight for people like us, fight for gig workers who don't have healthcare, guarantee income and paid leave, fight for taxi driver who committed suicide. The 9 taxi drivers have committed suicide. Fight for everybody. Fight for our community, member of every community members of our community. And I am looking for everybody's solidarity to elect a taxi driver, a gig worker, somebody. We don't have a lot of, we have enough lawyer, we have enough businessmen in the Albany. We need a taxi driver, we need a gig worker who would fight, who understand the pain of our working class. And I will, I'm not running against any of this great candidate. I'm running to bring working class representation in the Albany, and I hope I can count on your support.
Thanks very much. Michael, to you now.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak here today. So as I said, I've been here for 12 years. I'm a retired sanitation worker. I actually picked up garbage in Woodside. I swept 61st Street and Roosevelt Avenue. I plowed Queens Boulevard. I plowed the PQE. I worked very, very hard to get to where I am. I remember the first day I walked into the assembly chamber, I called my wife and I said, I might be a little out of my league here. Maybe you need to be a doctor or a scholar or a lawyer or someone with a lot of knowledge to be here. And at the end of that first session, I talked at a local union meeting and I said, we need more labor representatives in Albany because they have no idea what they're doing. They do not represent working men and women. They live on Fantasy Island. And I've been working my ass off up there trying to do the best I can for my constituents every single day. And I co-sponsor all of these bills that everyone say are so progressive before anybody said they were progressive. So we've worked very hard in Albany. The Assembly majority has done more for criminal justice reform than has ever been done. And I'm proud of the record that I have, and I'll continue to fight for my community.
Thanks very much, candidates. That concludes our forum for the District 34 Democratic primary. A couple logistics for folks who are watching and getting ready to vote. Early voting is underway. It ends on June 21st. And as Jessica alluded to, primary election day is Tuesday, the 23rd. If you're voting by mail, the deadline for postmarked return ballot, absentee ballots is Tuesday, June 23rd. So get it in the mailbox on election day. Again, candidates, thanks for joining us, and everyone have a great afternoon.